remember this night like it was yesterday, even though I'm 28 now and it happened when I was 14. My parents left me home with my 20-year-old sister Maya for the weekend. At first, I was thrilled because it felt like real independence at that age. Maya told me she was heading to her boyfriend's place for a few hours and made me swear not to tell mom and dad, which I agreed to because I trusted her and honestly, I wanted the house to myself. She knew she'd be grounded for months if our parents found out. At first, having the place to myself felt amazing, especially on a Friday night. I ended up in the living room where I decided to binge watch a horror series on Netflix. Not the smartest choice when you're home alone, which I learned the hard way. I had been left alone before, but never overnight, and never this late. Honestly, by the third episode, I started getting uneasy. Not entirely because of the show itself, but because of how the house felt different at night. The random groaning of pipes, the wind rattling the windows, even the refrigerator humming periodically. Every time the show had a jump scare, I would flinch and glance over my shoulder toward the staircase leading to the second floor, half expecting to see someone standing there. Eventually, I couldn't handle it anymore. I didn't know why I was torturing myself like this. I shut off the TV and practically sprinted upstairs to my room like a terrified kid fleeing from imaginary monsters that chase you the moment you turn off the lights. When I reached my room, I went into the bathroom that connected to the hallway, where I brushed my teeth as quickly as possible and tried to calm my racing heart. After that, I went into my room to play Fortnite on my PlayStation, thinking it would distract me and make me feel less scared. I played for several hours, losing track of time and getting absorbed in the matches. Eventually, my squad got eliminated in the final circle and I got annoyed. I decided it was late and I should probably get some sleep. Not long after lying down, I felt the vibration of the garage door closing, and I assumed it was Maya coming back. I lay there awake, listening to the sounds of my sister moving around downstairs, which was strange because usually when she'd come home, she'd come straight upstairs to her room. But there were odd sounds coming downstairs for far too long, and it started feeling unusual. They were subtle, light footsteps or unexplainable creaks and shifts. I felt my stomach start twisting. That stupid decision to watch that horror show was really messing with my head. I got up and went to the window to look outside, expecting to see Maya's Honda in the driveway where she usually parks, but it wasn't there. That's when genuine panic set in. I had my phone, but it was dead on my nightstand. I had forgotten to charge it. I had no way to contact my parents or Maya without leaving my bedroom and going downstairs to use the landline, which felt absolutely impossible at that moment. I quietly crept to my bedroom door to make sure it was locked, knowing full well that the cheap lock could be picked with a bobby pin. I knew that if someone really wanted to get in, they could. I looked around frantically and decided the only safe place was my closet. I squeezed inside behind my hanging clothes, pulled the door shut carefully from the inside, and tried to steady my breathing as I listened. At this point, I vividly remember praying that I was just being paranoid and that it actually was Maya. Maybe she had parked on the street instead. Seconds later, I heard someone jiggling the doorknob, trying to get in, and then moments later, the door creaked open. Someone was inside my room, and I had no idea who it was or what they wanted. I stayed completely frozen, listening to footsteps moving around my room, feeling the floorboards creak beneath the weight of someone walking around and hearing things being picked up and set down. Every second felt like hours. I was terrified that the closet door could swing open any second and that would be it for me. I still hoped it was my sister playing some twisted prank, but I stayed silent, barely breathing, and praying that whoever it was would just leave. I could hear them dragging something heavy across the floor at one point, which made my heart pound even harder. I felt like I had been hiding for an eternity, though it was probably only 15 or 20 minutes. Eventually, I heard footsteps receding and moving out of my room. I stayed in the closet for what felt like hours, probably closer to 3, until finally I heard Maya shouting my name from downstairs. Her voice sounded frantic and angry. A few moments later, she burst into my room and yelled my name again. I stumbled out of the closet, and the first thing she did was demand to know what I was doing in there and what had happened to her jewelry box. It was at this moment that it truly hit me. It was definitely not my sister who had been in the house earlier. I explained everything as quickly as I could, still trembling and unable to stop my hands from shaking. Once she understood what I was saying, We both cautiously started checking the house together. That's when we realized how serious it really was. Cabinets were opened. Some of our valuables were missing, including laptops, tablets, and Maya's expensive camera equipment. It was obvious someone had been through the house taking anything worth money. Maya immediately called the police, understanding this was extremely serious, and we waited together, both on edge, checking doors and windows to make sure no one was still inside. The police arrived and took a report, documenting everything that was missing and asking us detailed questions about what had happened. They told us they'd investigate and that we should contact our parents immediately. Around 5 a.m., our parents arrived early. My dad was absolutely livid and went straight for Maya, yelling at her for being so irresponsible, not only leaving me alone, but also leaving the side door unlocked when she left. My mom rushed to me, wrapped me in a tight hug, and told me she was just grateful I was okay. Maya was forced to pay back everything that was stolen from her summer job earnings and was grounded for the rest of the year. I, on the other hand, wasn't punished at all. I was just traumatized, terrified by what had happened. The whole experience haunted me for years. Every time I thought about it, I could feel that same terror all over again, remembering hiding in that closet and hearing someone moving around my room, not knowing if I would survive the night. It was by far the most frightening experience of my life, and it has stayed with me even now. The neighbor who wasn't what he seemed. When I was just a little kid, maybe 4 or 5, I lived with my aunt and uncle. My parents had just divorced, and my mom was working 2 jobs to get back on her feet, so I stayed with family for a while. My older cousin Jake, who was 16, also lived there, so I was rarely truly alone. I was always told to never answer the door for strangers. We lived in a small, quiet suburb where most people knew each other. We had a neighbor who visited often to watch football games, help with yard work, or join weekend cookouts. I'll call him Rick. He seemed friendly with both my uncle and my cousin. He often shared beers with Jake when my aunt and uncle weren't looking and helped my uncle fix his boat or clean out the garage. If my uncle came back from a fishing trip with a big catch, Rick would be there to help haul everything in. One evening, I was briefly left home alone. My aunt had gone to her book club and called saying she'd locked her keys inside the community center. My uncle told me he was going to bring her the spare keys and asked if I wanted to come along. I said no because I was watching cartoons. He reminded me firmly not to open the door for anyone. Then he left. As soon as I saw his truck disappear down the street, the house became eerily quiet. Only a few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I walked up to it and called out asking who it was, and I heard Rick's familiar voice saying it was him. I told him through the door that my aunt and uncle weren't home, and he replied that he had just seen my uncle leaving. I told him Jake wasn't home either, and he said he'd been texting Jake and knew he was at basketball practice. Then he asked if he could come inside and wait. I told him I wasn't allowed to open the door for strangers, and he chuckled and insisted he wasn't a stranger, he was our neighbor and someone I knew well. In my child's mind, that logic made sense, but I didn't understand why he would want to come over when nobody else was home. I unlocked the door and opened it. Rick loomed over me. He was clearly drunk, swaying slightly, slurring his words, squinting. He stepped inside and put his hands on my shoulders as I instinctively backed up. I didn't feel scared yet because I'd seen Jake drunk before at parties. I told him he could wait in the living room while I went back to watch TV, but he wouldn't let go of my shoulders. I tried to pull his hands away, but I couldn't. His voice suddenly changed, becoming harsh and threatening, and he said things that frightened me deeply. Things I still can't fully remember, only the terror they caused. He dragged me into the kitchen and grabbed a large knife from the block on the counter. He held the blade near my stomach and asked in a low voice if I wanted to get hurt. When I started crying, he told me to shut up or he'd do worse. He dragged the flat side of the blade across my throat to show he wasn't joking. Then I heard my uncle's truck pulling back into the driveway. Car doors slammed outside. Relief washed over me, and I was about to scream for help, but Rick clamped his hand tightly over my mouth. He turned us both toward the doorway just as my aunt walked in. Her smile disappeared instantly when she saw him holding me with the knife. She screamed for my uncle to get inside right now. My uncle came running in, shouting in shock and fury, demanding to know what the hell was going on. He took one look at Rick holding me and charged forward with pure rage in his eyes. Rick shoved me hard to the floor. My aunt immediately rushed over, grabbed me protectively, and turned me away so I couldn't see what was happening, while telling me over and over that I was safe. I could still hear the violent struggle, the furniture breaking, people grunting and shouting. Eventually, my uncle overpowered him. When I finally looked up, my uncle was shoving Rick out the front door, screaming at him to never come back or he'd kill him, and then slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. As I grew older, I realized Rick had waited deliberately. He must have known Jake was at practice and that my aunt was at book club. He'd watched my uncle leave. That was his window of opportunity. I was too young to understand his true intentions back then. Years later, after my uncle's funeral, when I was sitting with my aunt reminiscing about memories, I brought up that night and how brave my uncle had been. She looked uncomfortable. She said it truly was a terrifying night. Then she asked if I remembered that my uncle went somewhere later that same night. I faintly remembered him leaving again, saying he had to take care of something even though it was already past midnight. When I asked where he went, she said she didn't remember exactly. It got me thinking. They never called the police to press charges against Rick, and I never saw Rick again after that night. My uncle was well respected in the community. He was friends with several police officers, served on the town council, and was known as someone who took care of problems quietly. No one would ever question if they saw a tarp-covered load in the back of his truck late at night heading out toward the woods.